There are lots more hashtag AXP topics, but what's up, audience?
We do. We have one more live audience question.
Okay.
This may be a little bit out of left field, but theists seem to they like to grandstand on the subject of morality. They like to claim that territory as their own, as if you don't have religion, you cannot be moral. And one of the chief things they seem to lean on is this concept of you cannot get an ought from an is. Mm-hmm. And even though that fits on a bumper sticker quite nicely, I've personally come to think that that's a false premise. But and I have more to say on it, but since I'm not the host of a talk show, I won't go into it. But I just want to. I'm wondering what your take on that premise might be.
Okay, well, hang on to that mic, because usually this is talk back and forth time, so we don't want to just get a sentence and then drop you. John, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, that's something that I've never really understood, why you need somebody to tell you what you ought to do in order to be moral. I think we're kind of hardwired to be moral people, to be cooperative, to get along with others, to help our survival as a species. And I think what religion has done is glommed onto what's already naturally there and said, here, you wouldn't be this way if it wasn't for the religion, or if it wasn't for the God that we created to explain things. I think it's just part of being human. And and then you get into the Euthyphro dilemma, and is it right because God says it's right, or is it right already, independently from what you think your God says? And
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think atheists should never make the mistake of underplaying is the fact that morality is a very hard, complicated topic, because the topic of morality is basically about how lots and lots of, 7 billion people living in the world can deal with each other in a way that is fair, and most importantly, that as many people as possible live a good, happy life as we possibly can. Those are and the question of how you're supposed to act. To me, the idea that you should just wait for a God to tell you what to do and then do that thing is kind of an easy out answer, because it absolves you of the question of thinking about why do you do those things. It's, well, the God says so, and my parents always told me to do whatever God says. So applying morality to the question is not 100% useless. It's maybe 98% useless. But if you just want to get across to people, you should act this way, and you don't want to explain it, then you can just say, because God said so, the end. And if they go for that, then you've successfully changed their behavior. Here's the problem with that. If you are a bad person, if you want to promote things that are objectively is a tricky word in this case, but actually harmful to somebody.
Demonstrably, maybe.
Right, demonstrably. If you want to do something that drags the sum total of human happiness downwards, if you want to hurt people, if you want to improve your position in the world at the expense of others, religion is also a really useful way to just get people to do what you say. And so if you're a person with perceived but unearned moral authority, like, let's say, for the sake of argument, you're a Catholic priest, and you say, give me your little kids and you can trust me because I'm a man of God. So, hey, look over there. if you're somebody who you don't want to take too much scrutiny or criticism, you can absolutely use religion to get away with stuff. We're atheists. We don't think there is a God, and so any time that you say that you are doing what God says, we think you are ultimately doing what a person says. Now, that doesn't mean, so that still leaves open the question of what should we do and how should we act? And I think, as I said, this is an incredibly complicated question that moral philosophers have been dealing with forever, since there have been moral philosophers. There are lots of ways to approach the question. There's consequentialism, where you decide what the consequences of your actions are and whether this would be in line or not in line with your goals and the goals of lots of other people. There are basically a variety of ways that you can use to analyze your actions and decide whether the things you're doing are good or not. But if you just say, if you just go with because I said so-ism, then you are getting rid of the criteria and just deciding arbitrarily to believe a particular person. And that can always lead a society into trouble, because it leaves everybody vulnerable to what if that person becomes somebody very bad and corrupt. How does that answer your question?
Well, it's you've said something, a lot of things that I agree with, and you've answered the question in part. But the specific thing about you cannot get an ought from an is.
Okay.
I mean, that was the focus of my question. But I was very interested in what you had to say about morality in general. But I mean, I believe that there are oughts that we get from ises, and I'd be happy to give you an example. But
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I want to say, like, I agree with you to an extent. Although when people say you can't get an ought from an is, that partly there is some truth to that, in the sense that nobody can necessarily tell you what kind of values you should have. Like, if you are Hannibal Lecter and what you really, really want is to eat everybody you meet, there is not necessarily an objective way for people to stop you from deciding that that's what you want. But the way that an effective society operates generally can't be like giving one person everything they want when it harms everyone else, because that ultimately does. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is create a place that we want to live in, a place where we will be the happy, where we collectively will be the happiest. And I don't want to be eaten by Hannibal Lecter. So
that's an instinct for self-preservation.
Yeah,
and self-interest.
And we don't have a society full of Hannibal Lecters running around wanting to eat people.
Generally, no.
It's not because God says don't eat people.
Right.
Right, but instincts that we have, which you touched on, things like self-preservation, self-interest, survival of the species, those are about as is as you get. Those anything that you can call instinctual. That must be an is. That's not something that you derive, that you ought to do. That's simply an instinct that you feel. You see that an animal kingdom.
I mean, you say that that's just the way things are, but I mean, I could also be a masochist who likes getting hurt. So, you know, you can't necessarily make a blanket generalization about people. So, I mean, when it comes down to the question of what people like and what people want, you can't necessarily dictate that. But suppose that you start from a position of, okay, our goal in society is to do so-and-so. You can set up rules that objectively get you towards the thing that you want or further from the thing that you want. And if that thing is measurable, like, I want people to live for as long as possible, to pick an example. I want everybody to have the longest lifespan they can. Forget everything else. you can look at a set of rules and you can say, yeah, that gets us closer to that point. So the answer to can you get an is from an ought is yes and no.
You mean ought from an is?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Well, I mean, if you have an instinct or not, that state is an is it not?
Yeah, to a certain
Can
extent.
be, yeah.
But it's complicated. I don't think it's purely instinctual, but I don't think it's.
But
it's
if
purely,
someone does have an instinct, that's not something that they can't. That's not an ought. Whatever that instinct is. If your instinct is to be a mass murderer, that is still an is it not?
Right. So I mean,
and then your behavior follows from that instinct.
The fact that I don't want to die happens to be just an is about me. But let's say that John wants to kill me for his own personal reasons. One of us is not going to get what we want. I hope it's John. And so the question of ought we let John kill me right now or not is not necessarily a question that we can objectively resolve unless we can settle on something that we as a group are trying to achieve with those rules.
Contrary for self-preservation. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
It would be contrary. It would contradict my own instinct for self-preservation if I permitted a society in which a person could simply kill someone because they wanted to.
Right.
Because then they could kill me
what if
they
the
wanted
society was just you can kill whoever you want and nobody else can? That is one set of social rules.
That's like the kings of England.
Right. Sure.
Off with his head. And I don't find that particularly moral myself.
Oh, but is your personal feeling that that's not particularly moral and is?
Well, it certainly creates an ought for me.
For you,
I do. I most definitely get an ought from that is.
Okay.
But in the people of England, since I brought up that example, but the off with his head crowd. Mm-hmm. Well, they believe that the king was the representative of God on earth, for one thing. They were anointed or some such. There was the divine right of kings. They believed that the king embodied the country, and therefore they were all powerful. All of the people of England were owned by the king. So basically it was amoral to be, but that was from their belief.
Right. That
belief is an is, not an ought. Well, I guess, it's... Some is and ought. Sometimes it's a gray area whether something is and an ought. But I don't want to go off on a tangent.
Yeah, we hate that idea because our values, which we definitely think of as an improvement over past values, are out of line with monarchs, and I think that's great. I think that measuring progress, and I think that if you go over what we as a society have gained and how much better off most people are than they would have been during feudalism, then I think in that sense we have absolutely definitely improved, and in that way I think that we can objectively demonstrate that our set of rules is at least an improvement on what they had based on what we've accomplished.
There's also you can look to the animal kingdom where a basic sense of fairness. When something is unfair, well, things ought to be more fair. Like there was an experiment I saw recently where two monkeys were in a cage next to each other. I'll try to be brief. Sorry. Mm-hmm. But two monkeys right next to each other, they could see each other. Well, one was if they were trained, if they pushed a button, they would get food. One monkey would always get cucumber, which is they can eat it, but it's bland. The other monkey would get grapes, and the monkey that got grapes was like, "Hey, it's great." But the monkey that got cucumbers, even though the first couple of times he got a cucumber, he was okay with it. Suddenly, seeing the other guy getting grapes, well, I mean, he got very angry, and he would even like refuse and throw the cucumber away and say, "Where's my grape?" Right. And that displays a basic instinctive sense of fairness, and that monkey clearly, if we can understand anything at all, that monkey certainly felt like he ought to get a grape because it was unfair for him to get cucumbers, while the other one got grapes. And the sense of fairness is an ought. Or the belief that things should tend towards fairness is certainly an ought that you can get from the is.
I think that a sense of fairness is absolutely something good to strive toward, but there are a lot of complicated reasons why I think that is better, which I could go ramble on about for a while, but I don't think that the fact that something is is instinctually true necessarily means that it's a thing that we're going to aim at. In a lot of cases, what we see as oughts happen to be in line with our instincts, but that's not always true. For instance, when you look at evolutionary theory and people talk in general terms, like the idea of biological machines supposedly is to make more biological machines and crank out as many kids as they can and to make life as viable as possible for their kids. That's fine as far as it goes, but a whole lot of atheists that I know are voluntarily child-free and not interested in having more kids. And you're not going to, tailor something around their instincts and say, okay, from now on the law is everybody have more kids. Yep. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if we lost the mic or if you're thinking about it.
Oh no, I was just thinking about a law saying that we would have more kids. Well, the law was different from morality. Morality is basically something a conclusion you arrive at based about how things the world ought to work.
When it comes to a question of, hey, I'm talking to an individual person and should I tell him to have more kids or should I tell him not to have more kids? Instinct doesn't enter into it. There are a lot of things I might base that advice on. But one of the biggest ones is, does that person I'm not going to tell them, because you have a biological instinct to procreate, you should definitely have as many kids as you can.
Well, I guess where I'm having difficulty is I don't see where morality comes into that question. You're that sounds like you're more expressing an opinion.
Well, a lot of things...
But I don't see that it's moral or immoral or even, at best, amoral.
Well, okay, I could make a case that you should...
Your opinion about children.
I could make a case that you should not have more kids, because the more kids you have, the more you contribute to the overpopulation problem, which may not immediately bite you, but it could be an issue in the next generation or two where it depletes the world's resources. That would be an argument that has nothing necessarily to do with just instincts, and also I could probably counter it with some arguments why you should go ahead and have more kids.
I think what that points out, though, is that it is complicated. Like you mentioned earlier, that there's an instinctive part of it, which is, I think, what the monkey experiment shows, is that there's something inherent, at least in primates, that wants a sense of fairness, that wants to survive, that wants to, maybe not wants, but is, in some sense, naturally cooperative and has a sense of empathy. And then there's another component of that is that we make rational decisions on what is better for the greater good. And I think
definitely. And
I think even that has kind of an innate instinctive part too, is that wanting to have things be for the greater good and not just the personal. What can I what can I get? So yeah, I think it's both, and it's hard to say that the monkey with the cucumbers was objecting to that just because somebody wrote down a list of things that are right and wrong, and said that this is it's wrong to have only some people get grapes and some people get cucumbers. They don't. I don't think that a monkey is going to think about it in any kind of religious terms.
Right. Well, and I mean, this doesn't even have to be an abstract question necessarily, because there is a lot of political disagreement about whether it's a good idea to move society towards something where everything is more egalitarian, or if you're far on the libertarian or conservative side, you might say, let absolutely everybody do what they want because the market will reward people who are good producers. And so I am not saying all this to weigh in on my particular political persuasion, but just the fact that there are very liberal and very conservative people in the world who all want to set up a system where their values play out demonstrates that there is a lot of tension in our society to begin with over how the rules should be set up and also what we are trying to accomplish. Because I think a very conservative person would say, I don't care if that monkey feels like he should have gotten a grape. The fact is, the monkey who got the grape, and if you are just doing handouts of grapes to monkeys, then you're going to create a dependence.
That sounds like a big beefy rationalization on the part of the grape owners of the society.
Again, I'm not saying this is what I think.
That monkey worked for that grape.
They hoarded all the grapes.
Right,
and
he's a grape producer.
Everyone, well, I have all the grapes I have, so, and also it snowed in where I am, so global warming is solved, right? Sorry, that was a tangent, but we do have another studio question, so I don't want to monopolize all the time.
Okay.
We have another studio question. My name's David, by the way. I don't think
Thanks, David.
said.
Hi, David.